So as I was saying, let the glue Alright, let's slow down a bit and go to Harbor Freight for the 5th time this week and grab some stuff. And this is kind of what woodworking looks like to me. It's not all hand planes and close-ups of beautiful chisel work as those damn YouTubers would have you believe. It's about fixing mistakes and making mistakes and repeatedly using an excess of glue so that you spend even more time sanding. Despite these frustrations, I continue to be obsessed by the craft. I don't know if it's the spinny sharp things that have the potential to seriously injure me, or the reward of thinking something into existence. Or perhaps, in this instance, it was the fact that my girlfriend and I desperately needed a place to store our shoes and backpacks and jackets and broom, all the while not blocking but covering this unsightly gray breaker box. And so, a tree haul was thought into existence. And with that beautifully edited montage, I have the side support template complete. Next, I cut the pieces out of the walnut glue up to roughly match the shape of the template pieces. I cut a clean edge on the sides of the templates to be joined. I joined everything using dowels, and again, to my detriment, a shit ton of glue. Once I had the pieces glued together, I could get to the final shape of the template by using a flush trim router bit. This particular sub-assembly was especially difficult, as I needed to glue multiple pieces at once. It got a little messy, but nothing a little brute force clamping pressure can't solve, right? I rounded over all the edges with a fairly large round over bit. And damn, it started looking like a giraffe. Then it was on to the easiest part, which was just cutting the shelves into a rectangle. And then on to the hardest part, making and aligning the grooves for joining the shelves to the side supports. I used some straight MDF pieces as my guides. Turned out to be a little loose, but functional. Now it wouldn't be a true YouTube woodworking video if there wasn't some good old close-up chisel work. My personal favorite. I'm realizing I might be a hand tool guy. There's something so satisfying about slicing wood with a sharp edge that you just don't get with power tools. And to cover the plywood edges, I used iron-on edge banding. And definitely don't trim edge banding this way. I gouged the shelves a couple of times doing it like this. The next step was a whole lot more of dowel joinery. I ended up buying a fancy schmancy doweling jig to do a few things my cheaper and simpler doweling jig just couldn't. In this instance, I wanted to make holes offset from the center. The fancy schmancy jig allowed me to do that. The jig also includes an indexing pin to accurately reproduce the spacing on the adjoining piece. I made the same sequence of holes on the shelf piece. And a dry fit ensured everything lined up. This jig, which is actually known as the Dowel Max, changes configuration to be able to drill into the face of the board too, which a typical self-centering doweling jig can't do. And that concludes the joinery portion of this video. Stay tuned for sand. For the shelf surface, I applied the Minwax polyacrylic water-based finish. And then it was on to the big assembly. Actually broke it up into sub-assemblies. Oh, the music is back. Well, that actually sounds kind of nice. But no, that means another video montage. No, it takes me so long to edit. No. Okay, thank God that's over. No more montages after that. The next part of the build was the cabinet. I referenced the edge of the breaker box to get its width. I cut out the cabinet sides using 1/2-inch plywood instead of 3/4. It was cheaper and just gonna hold some brooms and other tall things that don't weigh a lot. This was my first time building a cabinet, so in all honesty, I didn't know the best way to go about it. I let the great woodworkers of YouTube be my guide. And there it was, a tall box that I screwed together. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to narrate. It was kinda nice not doing it for a little bit, right? Anyways, as you can see, I'm working on the face frame. This was a tip I saw online. Use a cut nail to hold the face frame in place so it doesn't slip around on the glue when you clamp it down. I also found the nails to be helpful in giving me time for alignment. They kept the frame raised above the glue until I clamped them down into the nails. Everything was looking good until I ran into my next major issue. Damn it, I'll deal with this later. Now you can't have a cabinet without a door, because then it would just be a cupboard. Or are those the same thing? In any case, I made the door, and in a stroke of woodworking ingenuity, I sprayed the edge banding with water to allow it to wrap around the corners. Now the next thing I did could be considered controversial. I added a splash of color. That is, after a bit of spackling to cover end grain and other blemishes. But before we go color crazy, let's solve that issue from before. I forgot to take into account the curved profile of the face frame in my measurements. The most reasonable fix at this point was to simply push the cabinet to the appropriate position and shim the back of it. As I slathered on some bold orange paint, I was feeling a slight trace of regret because, well, it was really orange. Despite this feeling, I marched forth towards my vision, sanding in between layers of paint to get a smooth finish. I secured the cabinet to the rest of the construction by simply bolting it to a few adjoining surfaces using threaded inserts.
Oh shit.
And I accidentally cracked the edge of the shelf. Let's just ignore that. To give the cabinet a floaty look, I screwed down an 1.5 inch thick piece of plywood inset from the cabinet edges. And finally, it was finish time. I chose to use tung oil, well, because I wanted to try something I hadn't used before. I rubbed 3 to 4 layers on, sanding in between coats. Once I had the cabinet in place, the last step was adding the brass hardware. With all the mistakes, hardware store trips, and frustrating lessons, I'm left with an object that was born of my thinking and my labor. Woodworking is a highly rewarding craft, and is why, despite the struggles, I can't get enough of it. So get out there and play with some wood, glue, and sharp steel. Because if you can think it, you can build it.